2025 WNBA Finals presented by YouTube TV. We'll begin with remarks from Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, and then we'll turn it over to question and answer. Please have
a welcome on Hoops Pulse WNBA. What if you were given a golden ticket to mainstream prominence, a key that might open a billion-dollar future, and you simply refused to turn it? The WNBA was in exactly that situation. Caitlin Clark, a cultural phenomenon and generational talent, was the league's key. And while the whole world watched for the first time, Cathy Engelbert, the league's commissioner, witnessed a move that was so cruel and perplexing that it left millions of fans, both new and old, wondering in disbelief. Is the WNBA deliberately attempting to undermine its own success? The league had battled for every bit of media attention, every dollar in sponsorship, and every fan in the seats for decades. Then a single player showed up and overnight altered the entire equation. This was more than a single position on a basketball team's roster. This concerned a turning point that could shape women's athletics for the next 20 years, and the decision has sparked an ongoing whirlwind of discussion, controversy, and unfiltered outrage. The truth of what really transpired in the WNBA's corporate offices and behind the closed doors of Indiana Fever basketball is more stunning, more political, and exposes a far deeper issue than anybody could have predicted. It all started when a force of nature unlike anything the sport had ever seen stepped onto the court. Caitlin Clark was more than simply a basketball player in college. She was a walking, talking revolution in sneakers, a cultural tidal wave. Her Iowa Hawkeyes games not only set viewing records for women's basketball, they shattered basketball records across the board, whether they were for men or women. Her last thrilling collegiate performance in the 2024 NCAA Women's Championship game attracted an astounding 24 million viewers, with an average of 18.9 million. It was the most viewed basketball game of any kind in the United States in 5 long years, putting that figure into stark perspective. More people watched it than the NBA Finals that year. More people watched it than the World Series championship games or the later rounds of the Masters. The American public's message was as loud and clear as a stadium buzzer. They wanted to see Caitlin Clark play basketball, not just basketball in general. And that enormous, enthusiastic crowd followed her straight to the WNBA when the historically troubled Indiana Fever selected her first overall. The league, which had struggled for 25 years to overcome the notion that it was a niche sport, was suddenly and unexpectedly one of the most sought-after events in town. With an average of 2.1 million viewers, Caitlin Clark's professional debut game on ESPN2 became the most viewed game in the league in more than 20 years. To accommodate the tens of thousands of fans, many of whom were first-time WNBA attendees eager to catch a glimpse of her signature logo three-point shots, teams that were accustomed to playing in quiet, half-empty arenas were rushing to move their home games against the Indiana Fever into massive NBA stadiums. Within an hour of the draft, fanatics sold out of her number 22 jersey. Not only was it a bestseller, but it reportedly sold more than every player's jersey from every other club in the league put together. She was a one-woman economic stimulus package, and because of the security risks and logistical challenges of flying the most famous female athlete in the world on commercial flights, the league had to address the long-debated issue of chartering private flights for teams. There was a Caitlin Clark effect, and it was the largest contribution the league had ever received, with its impact becoming measurable across television, attendance, merchandise, and overall attention. However, although sponsors, fans, and TV networks were ecstatic about her presence, a very different and far more antagonistic mood was developing inside the league among some of the same players who stood to gain from her notoriety. The public was shown the red carpet, but behind the scenes, a harsh and deeply uncomfortable welcome appeared to be developing. Caitlin Clark's targeting was brutally evident from the first possessions of her rookie season. She was subjected to significantly more physical contact than many expected from ordinary rookie hazing or the traditional welcome to the league moments that come with being a top draft selection. She was routinely hip-checked, shoulder-checked, elbowed, and knocked to the ground. The officials often failed to call a foul, creating the impression among some observers that she was being subjected to a difficult and inconsistent standard. Some seasoned players appeared determined to test her physically and demonstrate that the WNBA was a different environment and that her collegiate fame would not automatically make professional basketball easier. However, one particular occurrence blew the lid off the entire discussion and brought worldwide attention to the debate surrounding the treatment of Clark. Alyssa Thomas was waiting for the ball to be inbound during a nationally broadcast game against the Phoenix Mercury. Caitlin Clark was standing close by, uninvolved in the activity and not expecting contact from Thomas. Clark was sent falling to the hardwood floor after a forceful shoulder check from Thomas, an incident that immediately sparked controversy among fans and analysts. There was little apparent connection to the basketball play itself, leading many viewers to characterize it as a deliberate act of hostility away from the ball and an obvious cheap shot. The referee's decision to initially rule it a common foul drew significant criticism, with many fans arguing that the punishment did not adequately reflect the seriousness of the contact. The controversy became so intense that the league's later review and disciplinary response only added fuel to the ongoing debate about officiating, player safety, and how the WNBA should protect its most visible stars. Retrospectively elevated to a flagrant 1 foul after the game due to the intense public uproar. The response was much more revealing than the occurrence itself. In a revealing silence at her post-game news conference, Alyssa Thomas declined to respond to any questions about it. What was even more unsettling was that Caitlin Clark's collegiate competitor and teammate, Aya Wilson, was seen on tape appearing to cheer the physical play from the bench. It was more than simply strong defense. This was personal, or at least that was how many fans interpreted it. The millions of fans who followed Caitlin Clark received a powerful message as well. Your new favorite, the player you believe could help elevate this league, does not belong here. This simmering tension on the court was only the outward manifestation of a much bigger and more significant struggle taking place behind closed doors. A struggle involving power, egos, and decisions that would eventually shock the sports world. A major international basketball tournament was approaching as the turmoil on the floor continued to escalate. The 2024 Paris basketball tournament, representing your nation on a global stage, was the ultimate goal for every exceptional athlete, a dream come true. And almost everyone, fans, media analysts, and marketers, saw Caitlin Clark's addition to the Indiana Fever squad as inevitable for a star of her extraordinary caliber. The question was not whether the announcement would be made, but rather when. Many fans saw Indiana Fever women's basketball as a modern dynasty, and it appeared to be the most natural and sensible decision to bring the world's most popular and watched basketball player into its already star-studded spotlight. Although her famed gravity-warping three-point range would be a deadly weapon against any defense, the selection was not based solely on her unquestionable talents. More significantly, it had to do with basketball's business and expansion. Basketball would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expose Caitlin Clark and the WNBA to billions of people worldwide. NBC executives were reportedly excited about the possibility of enormous viewership. You could almost imagine the Caitlin Clark camera becoming a constant presence on television, following her every step and attracting millions of casual viewers from around the globe who had only recently discovered the Iowa basketball sensation. Not only was her inclusion anticipated, but the business community also viewed it as a clear and potentially important strategic step for the long-term viability and expansion of the women's game. The conditions appeared ideal for her worldwide coronation, which could have transformed her from a national phenomenon into a genuine global star and attracted huge numbers of new WNBA supporters. Or so many people believed. Even though the news was released on a calm Saturday morning, it had an enormous impact on the sports industry, reverberating through news outlets and social media platforms. Trusted sources released the women's basketball team's 12-person roster, and Caitlin Clark's name was missing. Pure, undiluted disbelief was the first universal reaction, but it quickly turned into a tidal wave of anger. How could the selection committee leave the most influential and popular player in the entire sport at home? Whether viewed through basketball logic, business logic, or simple common sense, the decision seemed to contradict everything that made sense. Players such as Diana Taurasi, Brittany Griner, and Breanna Stewart were among the established veterans and WNBA superstars selected for the team. They were all exceptional athletes, accomplished winners, and deserving players in their own right. However, none possessed even a fraction of Caitlin Clark's star power, cultural impact, or ability to attract massive crowds. Not even close. Removing her from the squad looked less like a basketball decision based purely on merit and more like a deeply personal political power move. The millions of new fans she had brought to the sport were suddenly being told that the athlete they loved would not be welcomed on the biggest stage, delivering a brutal message to both Clark and her supporters. The reaction was immediate, fierce, and overwhelming. Controversy exploded across social media, television news networks, and sports talk shows. The story quickly moved beyond athletics and became a national conversation, sparking intense debate about professional jealousy, gatekeeping, and what many viewed as a shocking failure of leadership at the highest level. The committee had made its choice, but in doing so, it created a public relations disaster of its own making and handed critics who had long accused the WNBA of being outdated, exclusive, and resistant to popular success a powerful new argument. So what happened next? The disastrous situation only became worse when officials attempted to explain the decision. Indiana Fever basketball decision-makers were forced to respond to intense public criticism and accusations that Clark had been deliberately snubbed. The stated reasons for Caitlin Clark's shocking omission were so weak that they only intensified the backlash. Through anonymous media leaks, members of the selection committee pointed to the fact that she had played only a limited number of WNBA games at the time, emphasizing her lack of professional experience. They also carefully mentioned team chemistry, suggesting that adding such a massive media magnet and celebrity could disrupt the existing squad's delicate balance. Even the slightest examination caused those explanations to fall apart. Sports historians and analysts quickly challenged the experience argument, pointing out that former stars such as Candace Parker in 2008 and Breanna Stewart in 2016 had both earned spots on the Olympic basketball team as young players with limited professional experience. Introducing new talent on the biggest basketball stage was hardly unprecedented. The chemistry argument was even more revealing. It sounded like carefully packaged business language, masking the possibility that established players simply did not want Caitlin Clark around. It also reinforced a narrative that had been growing for weeks, that some members of the WNBA's old guard were frustrated by Clark's sudden fame and the unprecedented level of media attention surrounding her. The underlying reality many people sensed was fear. They feared the media circus that would inevitably follow Caitlin Clark. They worried that if the coach did not give her enough playing time, fans and reporters would react angrily. Above all, they appeared concerned about upsetting influential veteran players, particularly Diana Taurasi, who based on their public comments and behavior did not always appear ready to hand the spotlight to a new generation. Internal politics, personal grudges, and accusations of jealousy became central to the harsher interpretation of a decision that officials struggled to explain. But what truly exposed the seriousness of the situation was the reaction, or lack of reaction, from the one person with the authority to calm the storm. WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert became a major focus as the controversy spiraled. This was her opportunity to take control of the narrative, protect the league's most valuable asset, and reassure millions of new fans that the WNBA was a modern, forward-looking organization prepared for its growing spotlight. Instead, the public witnessed what many viewed as a masterclass in corporate avoidance, carefully chosen language, and a massive missed opportunity. Cathy Engelbert's public response appeared weak and defensive to many observers, showing what critics considered a failure to recognize the scale of the public outrage. Rather than directly addressing the controversy, she repeatedly shifted attention toward the selection committee's independent process and the accomplished athletes who had made the roster. She could have used the moment to express excitement about Caitlin Clark's future, recognize her enormous cultural impact, and make a bold statement about the league's future. She could have presented the WNBA as the proud home of one of the world's most talked-about athletes, someone so influential that her omission had become a national controversy. Instead, the response relied heavily on bureaucratic, dry, and cautious language that only fueled further frustration. That became the truly painful part of the decision. A brilliant young athlete was not merely left off a roster by a group of selectors. In the eyes of critics, the league's leadership appeared to defend the existing system at the expense of its emerging superstar during a crisis fueled by accusations of jealousy and gatekeeping. The world received a troubling message from what many considered Engelbert's silence and weak defense of the decision. Either the league's leadership was unwilling or unable to manage the extraordinary phenomenon it had been handed. At one of the most important turning points in the WNBA's history, critics viewed it as a devastating leadership failure. Caitlin Clark's exclusion from the Olympic basketball team also carried consequences far beyond one roster decision. The WNBA and its broadcast partners could potentially face the long-term consequences of what many viewed as a major financial and marketing mistake. The opportunity cost could be enormous. The basketball competitions are,